Caleb Brennan pressed his frozen fingers against the girl's throat, searching for a pulse. Nothing. He pressed harder, his own heart pounding against his ribs. Then, faint, flickering life. She was still alive, but barely. He had no food, no medicine, no warm shelter. Just a worn-out blanket, and 17 years of learning how to survive when nobody wanted him around. Carrying her meant death for them both. Leaving her meant she'd be gone by morning. He lifted her anyway. What happened next brought 30 armed warriors to his door and changed everything he thought he knew about family. Subscribe now and follow Caleb's story to the very end. Drop a comment telling us which city you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel.
Ciao.
The blood made a trail. Caleb Brennan had been tracking a rabbit for 3 hours through the San Juan Mountains. When he saw it, dark red splashed against white snow, already freezing into crimson ice. His empty stomach growled, but something deeper made him stop. This wasn't animal blood. The pattern was wrong. Too much of it. And the trail led upward toward the ridge where nothing lived this time of year. He should have walked away. Every lesson the world had taught him said to mind his own business. Keep his head down, stay invisible. Invisible boys survived. Curious boys got hurt. But his feet were already moving. The Colorado Territory in December 1878 wasn't kind to anyone. Least of all a 17-year-old orphan with no family, no money, and no reason for anyone to notice if he disappeared. Caleb had learned that lesson 3 years ago, when the yellow fever took his mother, then his father, then every person in the mining camp who'd ever shown him kindness. He'd buried them all himself because nobody else would touch the bodies. Since then, he'd lived like a ghost in these mountains. Hunting what he could, stealing what he couldn't, sleeping in caves and abandoned claims. The folks in Silverton called him that feral boy when they talked about him at all, which wasn't often. He climbed the ridge following the blood. The girl was lying face down in a snowdrift, her black hair spread around her like a dark halo. Her buckskin dress was torn at the shoulder, and the source of all that blood was immediately clear, a deep gash across her thigh that had soaked through the makeshift bandage she'd tried to tie around it. Caleb dropped to his knees beside her. Hey, can you hear me? No response. He pulled off his thin coat and pressed it against the wound, feeling the cold bite into his own skin immediately. His fingers found her throat, searched for a heartbeat. For a terrible moment, there was nothing. Then, weak, thready, but there a pulse. She was alive, barely. Come on, he muttered, not sure if he was talking to her or himself. Don't you die on me. Don't you dare. Her eyes fluttered open. Dark eyes, almost black, filled with pain and fear and something else, recognition. Not of him specifically, but of what he was. A white boy. A settler. The enemy. Her hand shot toward her belt, grasping for a knife that wasn't there anymore. Easy, Caleb said, raising his hands. I ain't gonna hurt you. I'm trying to help. She spoke rapidly in a language he didn't understand. Her voice cracked and desperate. She pointed east toward the higher peaks, then grabbed his arm with surprising strength for someone who'd lost so much blood. Your people? Caleb asked. They're that way. She nodded frantically, then winced as the movement sent fresh pain through her body. Caleb looked east. The peaks she was pointing toward were at least 2 days' journey through Dead Man's Pass, a stretch of mountain terrain that had earned its name honestly. Even experienced trappers avoided it in winter. For a starving boy carrying an injured girl, it would be suicide. He looked back at her face. She couldn't have been more than 16. Same as him when the fever came through and took everything. What's your name? He asked. She hesitated, studying his face like she was trying to read something written there. Finally, she spoke. Ayanna. Ayanna. He tested the word. I'm Caleb. Caleb Brennan. He took a deep breath, already knowing what he was about to do, and already knowing it was probably going to kill him. All right, Ayanna. Let's get you home. Yard. The first hour was the hardest. Caleb had to carry her on his back, her arms wrapped around his neck, her legs dangling uselessly because she couldn't put weight on the injured one. She was lighter than he expected, too light, like she hadn't been eating well either, but the mountain terrain made every step a battle. "You still with me?" he asked, feeling her grip loosen. "Yes." Her English was accented, but clear. "Why do you help me?" "Ain't sure," Caleb admitted, hauling himself over a rocky outcrop. "Ain't like I got anything better to do." "You could die?" "Could have died 100 times already. Ain't happened yet." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "The men who hurt me. They will come back." Caleb's stomach tightened. "What men?" "3 of them. White men with rifles. They came to our sacred hunting ground. My father sent me to warn them away." Her voice turned bitter. "They shot me instead." "They shot you for warning them. They shot me for being what I am." Caleb didn't have an answer for that. He'd seen enough ugliness in his 17 years to know she was telling the truth. Some folks looked at Native people and saw nothing but targets. "Your father," he said, changing the subject. "He important." Ayana's grip tightened on his shoulders. "He is Maka, chief of our band, war leader of 12 summers." Caleb nearly dropped her. "Chief, your father's a chief." "Yes. And you're out here alone because—" "I was on vision quest, seeking guidance from the spirits." Her voice dropped. "I found bullets instead." They pushed on in silence after that, Caleb's mind racing. A chief's daughter. He'd saved a chief's daughter. If she died, her people would burn every settlement within 50 miles looking for vengeance. If she lived, he didn't know what happened if she lived. Nothing good for him, probably. Nothing good ever happened to Caleb Brennan. By the 6th hour, Caleb's legs were shaking so badly he could barely stand. They'd made it through the worst of the initial climb, but Dead Man's Pass stretched ahead of them like a frozen nightmare. The temperature had dropped steadily as they gained altitude, and the wind cut through Caleb's thin shirt like it wasn't even there. He'd given Ayana his coat hours ago, and the cold was settling into his bones. "We need to stop," he said, his teeth chattering. "Find shelter." "No." Ayana's voice was weak but insistent. "Must keep moving. If we stop, we die. If I collapse, we both die. Then don't collapse." Despite everything, Caleb felt his lips twitch toward a smile. "You always this bossy." "My father says I argue like a wounded bear." "Smart man, your father." He found a shallow overhang that blocked the worst of the wind and set Ayana down as gently as he could. Her face was pale, too pale, and when he checked her wound, fresh blood was seeping through the bandage. "This needs to be cleaned," he said, "and stitched. I ain't got supplies for either." Ayana reached into a pouch at her belt and pulled out a small bundle of herbs. "Yarrow. My grandmother taught me. It stops bleeding." Caleb took the herbs, crushed them between his palms, and packed them into the wound as carefully as he could. Ayana gasped, but didn't cry out. Tough girl. "Why do you live alone in the mountains?" she asked while he worked. "Where is your family?" "Dead." "How?" "Fever. 3 years back. Took everybody I ever knew." Ayana was quiet for a moment. "Among my people, when someone loses their family, the tribe becomes their family. No one is left alone." "Well, your people sound a lot nicer than mine." "We are not nice." A ghost of a smile crossed her lips. "We are practical. A person alone cannot survive. A person with family can survive anything." Caleb finished binding the wound and sat back. "I've survived 3 years alone. Have you?" Ayana's dark eyes studied him. "Or have you just been waiting to die without knowing it?" The question hit harder than Caleb expected. He didn't have an answer. They moved again as soon as Ayana could stand with his support. The pass narrowed as they climbed, forcing them to navigate single file along ledges that dropped hundreds of feet into darkness. One wrong step would send them both tumbling into oblivion, but Caleb kept his eyes forward and his feet steady. He'd walked this line between life and death so many times it almost felt normal. Almost. "The men who shot you," he said, helping Ayana over a patch of ice. "You get a good look at them. The leader had a scar." She traced a line down her cheek. "Here," and he wore a dead man's badge. A badge. Silver star, the kind lawmen wear. Caleb's blood went cold. A lawman's badge. Either these men had killed a marshal or they were posing as one. Neither option was good. "Did they follow you?" "I don't know. I ran as soon as I was shot. Everything after that is—" She trailed off, shaking her head. "It's okay. We'll get you home. Your father can sort out the rest." Ayana looked at him strangely. "You speak as if you will not be there." "I won't. Soon as I get you to your people, I'm heading back to my cave." "Alone." "It's what I know." "It is not what you deserve." Caleb laughed, a harsh sound that echoed off the rocks. "Lady, I ain't never gotten what I deserve. Worked out fine so far." Ayana didn't argue, but the look in her eyes said she wasn't finished with this conversation. They reached the eastern edge of tribal territory as dawn broke over the mountains. Caleb's body had gone numb hours ago. He couldn't feel his hands or feet, couldn't feel much of anything except the dead weight of Ayana on his back and the burning in his lungs with every breath. 18 hours of climbing through the worst terrain in Colorado, and he'd somehow made it. "Here," Ayana whispered, her voice barely audible. "My people are near. I can feel them." She slid off his back and stood on her own, swaying but upright. The yarrow had stopped the bleeding, and something like color had returned to her cheeks. "You'll be okay from here?" Caleb asked. "I'll be okay." She reached into her pouch again and pressed something into his palm. "Take this." Caleb looked down. It was a stone, smooth and black, with intricate symbols carved into its surface. It felt warm against his frozen skin, almost alive. "What is it?" "A promise." Ayana's eyes met his. "Among my people, this stone means protection. Whoever carries it is under the shield of our tribe. If you ever need help, show this stone and you will be answered." "I can't take this." "You already have." She closed his fingers around it. "You saved my life, Caleb Brennan. That is not a debt easily forgotten." Before he could argue, she turned and limped into the forest, disappearing into the shadows between the pines. Caleb stood there for a long moment, staring at the spot where she'd vanished. Then he turned around and started the long walk back to his cave. He made it back by mid-morning. His cave wasn't much, a hollow in the rocks, barely big enough to lie down in, with a fire pit near the entrance and a pile of stolen blankets in the corner. But it was home. The only home he had. Except something was wrong. Caleb froze at the edge of the clearing, every survival instinct screaming at him. The snow around his cave was churned up with hoofprints, dozens of them. And carved into the tree beside his entrance was a symbol he'd never seen before, 3 parallel lines crossed by an arrow. Someone had been here. Someone who'd waited for him. Someone who knew exactly where he lived. He circled the cave 3 times before going inside, his hand on the rusty knife at his belt. Everything looked the same, but felt different. His blankets had been moved. His cooking pot sat at a different angle. Even his small collection of river stones, the only things he had left from before the fever, had been disturbed. "They were looking for something," he muttered. "But what?" His fingers found the carved stone in his pocket. Warm, pulsing, almost like a heartbeat. A branch snapped outside. Caleb spun toward the sound, knife raised. Through a crack in the rocks he could see them, 3 warriors on horseback, sitting motionless in the shadows. War paint streaked their faces. Eagle feathers adorned their hair. Their eyes were fixed directly on his hiding place. They knew he was inside. More movement behind the cave, horses whickering softly, the sound of men shifting position surrounding him on all sides. Then a voice deep and commanding cutting through the thin mountain air. "Boy who helped our daughter, we know you are there. Come out. We wish to speak." Caleb's throat went dry. His legs wouldn't move. Every story he'd ever heard about what happened to white men who got involved in tribal affairs flooded through his mind, none of them ending well. But he was trapped. No food, no water, no way out. Winter was closing in, and these warriors could simply wait until he starved. Slowly, reluctantly, Caleb stepped out of the cave. 30 warriors materialized from the shadows. Caleb had never seen so many fighting men in one place. They emerged from behind rocks, from beneath snow-covered branches, from places where he would have sworn no one could hide. All of them armed. All of them watching him with expressions he couldn't read. The leader dismounted and walked toward him. He was older than the others, maybe 45, with a weathered face, marked by thin scars, and eyes that had seen more than any man should have to see. He moved with the deliberate grace of someone who'd spent his entire life balanced between violence and peace. "I am Maka," the warrior said in careful English. "Chief of the Lakota band that camps in these mountains. Ayana is my daughter." Caleb's mouth went dry. The chief himself. He'd brought the chief himself to Caleb's doorstep. "She told me what you did." Maka's eyes never left Caleb's face. How you carried her through the killing cold when you could have walked away. How you gave her your coat while you froze. How you bound her wound with gentle hands. "I just did what anyone would do." "No." Maka shook his head slowly. "Most would not. Most fear us too much to risk helping, or they hate us too much to care if we live or die." He stepped closer. "But you are different. Why?" Caleb thought about the question. Really thought about it. "Because she needed help. And I was there. That is all. That's all." Maka studied him for a long moment. The other warriors remained silent, but Caleb could feel their tension like electricity before a storm. One wrong word, one misunderstood gesture, and this conversation would end very differently. Finally, the chief spoke. "You have something that belongs to us." Caleb's hand moved instinctively to his pocket, where the carved stone rested. "Ayana gave this to me, said it was a promise." "May I see it?" Slowly, Caleb pulled out the stone and held it out. Maka looked at it, but didn't take it. "She gave you the spirit stone." His voice carried an edge of surprise. "Do you know what this means?" She said it meant protection. "It means more than that. This stone has been in my family for 7 generations. It is given only to those we consider worthy of joining our bloodline." Maka's eyes sharpened. "My daughter has named you brother." Brother. The word hit Caleb like a physical blow. He'd had a brother once, a little boy named Samuel, who died in his arms during the fever. The memory still hurt even after 3 years. "I don't understand," he said. "She barely knows me." "Among our people, character is revealed in action, not in time. You proved your character on that mountain." Maka gestured to his warriors. "That is why we are here, not to threaten you, to honor you." Caleb felt the world tilt slightly. He'd expected violence, expected anger, expected the worst. Not this. "But there is another reason." Maka continued, his voice growing harder. "The men who shot my daughter, they are still in these mountains. She told me. 3 men, one with a scar wearing a lawman's badge." Maka nodded grimly. "We have been tracking them for 2 days. Their trail led here to your mountain." His hand moved to the tomahawk at his belt. "We thought perhaps you were one of them." "I ain't. I know that now. But those men are close, very close, and when we find them—" He let the sentence hang. Caleb understood the implication perfectly. These warriors were out for blood, and when they got it, every soldier in the territory would come looking for someone to blame. "If you kill them here..." Caleb said slowly, thinking it through. The cavalry will find out. They'll see dead white men in tribal territory, and they won't ask questions. Perhaps. Not perhaps. Definitely. I've seen how settlers think. They'll burn every village within 100 miles looking for revenge. Maka's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. What would you have us do? Let murderers walk free? No. I'd have you be smart about it. Caleb's mind was racing, pieces falling into place. Those men killed a lawman. Probably more than one from what Ayana said. The army's already looking for them. If they just disappeared in a winter storm. You speak of deception. I speak of survival. Yours and mine both. One of the younger warriors spoke rapidly in Lakota, his tone angry. Several others murmured agreement. Maka raised a hand, silencing them. My warriors want justice, he said. Not tricks. Justice won't mean much when cavalry troops are burning your family's lodges. The words hung in the air between them. Maka's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. You ask me to trust you, the chief said finally. A stranger. A white man. I ask you to trust what I did for your daughter. Nothing more. Another long silence. Then Maka turned to his warriors and spoke in Lakota. Caleb couldn't understand the words, but he could see the effect they had. Some nodded reluctantly. Others looked angry, but resigned. When the chief turned back, his expression had shifted. Very well, Caleb Brennan. We will hear your plan, but know this. He stepped close enough that Caleb could see the old scars on his face, could smell the sage smoke in his hair. If you betray us, there is no place in these mountains where you can hide. No place on this earth where my people will not find you. I understand. Do you? Chief Maka. Caleb met his eyes steadily. I've been alone for 3 years. I've got nothing to betray you for, and nobody to betray you to. All I want is to survive the winter. If helping you does that, then we've got a deal. The chief held his gaze for a long moment. Then slowly, he nodded. Then we have a deal, Caleb Brennan. Brother to my daughter. Brother to our people. He clasped Caleb's forearm in a warrior's grip. Now tell me how we hunt these killers without starting a war, Sam. The planning took most of the afternoon. Caleb and Maka sat by a small fire while warriors moved around them, scouting positions and watching for the criminals who were still somewhere on this mountain. The carved stone rested between them, a symbol of the strange alliance they'd formed. The men are camped in the valley below, Maka said, sketching a map in the dirt. They think they are safe. They are wrong. How many supplies do they have? Little. They have been running for days. No horses left, almost no ammunition. So they're desperate. Desperate men are dangerous. Desperate men are stupid. Caleb studied the map. If they're low on supplies, they'll need to move soon. Either down toward Silverton for provisions, or up here to steal from whoever they can find. My scouts say they watched your cave yesterday. They know you live here. Caleb's stomach tightened. Then they're coming for me. Yes, they will come seeking shelter, seeking food. Maka's eyes glittered in the firelight. And they will find something else entirely. We can't just kill them and leave the bodies. Then what do you suggest? Caleb thought about it. About the canyon that dropped 1,000 feet into darkness. About the winter storms that buried men without a trace. About how easy it was for people to simply vanish in these mountains. We make it look like an accident, he said slowly. A tragic accident. 3 criminals fleeing from justice caught in a blizzard. Bodies never recovered. Case closed. Maka's expression was unreadable. And if they surrender, if they beg for mercy, then we take them to the army ourselves. Let them stand trial for what they did. Caleb paused. But something tells me men who shoot a girl for warning them off ain't the surrendering type." The chief was quiet for a long moment. Then he smiled a cold, hard smile that didn't reach his eyes. "You think like a warrior, Caleb Brennan. Perhaps my daughter chose better than I knew. I think like a survivor. That's different." "Is it?" Maka stood brushing dirt from his leggings. "We will prepare. When the killers come, and they will come, we will be ready." He looked down at Caleb. "Rest now. You will need your strength for what comes next." Caleb wanted to argue, but his body had other ideas. The exhaustion of the past 24 hours crashed down on him all at once, and he barely managed to stumble to his blankets before unconsciousness took him. His last thought before sleep claimed him was of Ayana's words. "A person alone cannot survive. A person with family can survive anything." Maybe she was right. Maybe he'd finally found something worth surviving for. Caleb woke to the sound of horses. His hand found his knife before his eyes opened. Instincts honed by 3 years of sleeping with one ear listening for danger. The fire had burned down to embers, and the cave was dark except for a thin line of gray light seeping through the entrance. Dawn. He'd slept through the entire night. "Easy, brother." A figure moved in the shadows near the cave mouth. "It is only our scouts returning." Caleb recognized the voice Dakota, one of Maka's younger warriors, who'd been assigned to watch the cave while Caleb slept. The man was maybe 25, with sharp eyes and a scar running along his jawline that he'd earned, according to camp gossip, fighting off a mountain lion with nothing but a hunting knife. "What did they find?" Caleb asked, pushing himself upright. Every muscle in his body screamed in protest. The 18-hour trek through Dead Man's Pass had taken more out of him than he'd realized. "The killers broke camp before sunrise. They are moving." Dakota's expression was grim. "Toward us." Caleb's stomach tightened. "How long?" 2 hours, maybe less." 2 hours. He had 2 hours to prepare for whatever was coming. 2 hours to make sure Maka's plan worked or watch everything fall apart. He stood ignoring the pain and walked to the cave entrance. The morning was cold and clear, the kind of crystalline winter day that made the mountains look like they'd been carved from ice. Beautiful and deadly, like everything else in this territory. Maka was standing at the edge of the clearing, speaking quietly with 3 of his senior warriors. When he saw Caleb approaching, he dismissed the others with a gesture. "You look like a man who has not eaten in days," the chief observed. "Probably because I haven't." Maka reached into a pouch at his belt and pulled out a strip of dried meat. "Eat. A warrior cannot fight on an empty stomach." Caleb took the meat and bit into it, too hungry to argue about charity. It was tough and salty, but his body practically sang with relief at having something, anything, to fuel it. "The killers are coming," he said between bites. "Yes. My scouts report 3 men all armed moving fast through the lower valley. They will reach your cave by mid-morning." "Are they tracking me or just running blind?" "Both, I think. They know someone lives on this mountain. They need supply shelter, perhaps a hostage." Maka's eyes darkened. "What they do not know is that 30 warriors wait for them." Caleb finished the meat and wiped his hands on his trousers. His mind was already working through the angles, trying to see the situation from every side. If they're moving fast, they're scared. Scared men do stupid things. Scared men also do desperate things. We must be ready for both. "What's the plan?" Maka turned and gestured toward the rocks surrounding the cave. "My warriors are already in position. When the killers arrive, they will see only you, a lone boy in a cave, easy prey. They will not see the arrows pointed at their backs until it is too late. And if they surrender, then they live. For now." The chief's voice carried an edge that suggested he was hoping they wouldn't surrender. "But if they choose violence—" "I know. I know." Caleb ran a hand through his hair, trying to think. "What about after? Even if everything goes perfect, someone's gonna come looking for these men eventually. That is why you are here, brother." Maka's tone softened slightly. You are the witness. The white boy who saw criminals flee into the mountains during a storm, who tried to help them but could not save them from their own foolishness. Nobody's gonna believe that. They will if you believe it, if you tell the story with conviction. The chief stepped closer, lowering his voice. I have seen many men lie in my years, Caleb Brennan. The good liars are not the ones who hide their eyes or stumble over their words. The good liars are the ones who convince themselves the lie is true. And if I can't convince myself, then we will have a problem. Maka smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Let us hope it does not come to that. A whistle echoed from somewhere above them, 2 short notes followed by 1 long. Caleb had learned enough of the warrior signals overnight to know what it meant. The killers had been spotted entering the pass. They are close. Maka said all business now. Get to your cave. Make it look like you are just waking up starting your day. Act natural. Natural? Right. Caleb laughed hollowly. Because hiding from murderers while 30 warriors surround my home is totally natural. You survived 3 years alone in these mountains. You know how to hide what you feel. Maka gripped his shoulder briefly. Trust yourself, brother. Trust us. We will not let them hurt you. Then the chief was gone, melting into the rocks like he'd never been there. Caleb stood alone in the clearing, his heart pounding against his ribs. Trust. That was the word that kept coming up. Trust the plan. Trust the warriors. Trust himself. He'd spent 3 years trusting nothing and no one. Old habits died hard. But Ayana's stone was warm in his pocket, and her father's words echoed in his mind. A person alone cannot survive. A person with family can survive anything. Maybe it was time to learn what that meant. Caleb walked back to his cave and started building a fire. The weight was the hardest part. He fed small sticks into the flames, watching the smoke curl toward the cave ceiling, trying to look like someone who had nothing more pressing to worry about than staying warm. Every few minutes he'd hear a soft sound from outside, a pebble shifting, a branch creaking, and his whole body would tense up before he remembered that those sounds were probably Maka's warriors adjusting their positions. Probably. The uncertainty was killing him. In 3 years of living alone, he'd always known exactly what threats he faced. Mountain lions, bear starvation, cold, predictable dangers with predictable solutions. But this armed men with nothing to lose, walking into an ambush he'd helped plan. This was something else entirely. He thought about his parents. His father had been a miner, a quiet man with calloused hands who'd taught Caleb how to read tracks and set snares and survive on almost nothing. His mother had been a school teacher before the fever, full of stories about heroes and villains and the clear moral lines that separated them. She would have hated this situation. The gray areas. The compromise between justice and survival. But she was gone, and Caleb was here, and sometimes survival meant getting your hands dirty. A voice from outside snapped him back to the present. Hello in the cave? Caleb's heart nearly stopped. The voice was rough hoarse from cold and exhaustion, but it carried clearly through the morning air. We don't mean no harm. Just need some supplies and we'll be on our way. Play the role, Caleb told himself. You're just a scared boy. You don't know who these men are or what they've done. He stood slowly, letting his fear show on his face. That part wasn't acting. Who's out there? 3 men emerged from the tree line about 50 yards away. They looked exactly as rough as Caleb had expected. Bearded, dirty, wearing clothes stiff with old blood and newer dirt. The leader was a big man with a scar running down his left cheek, and sure enough, a tarnished silver star was pinned to his coat. The dead marshal's badge. Name's Silas. The scarred man called out. Me and my boys got caught in a storm, lost our horses. Just need to warm up, maybe borrow some food. I ain't got much. Got more than us, I'd wager. Silas took a step closer, and Caleb saw his hand rest casually on the pistol at his hip. Come on, boy. Don't make this difficult. Behind the men, invisible in the rocks, 30 warriors waited with arrows nocked and ready. One word from Caleb, one signal, and this would all be over. But Maka had been clear. They needed to see what these men would do, needed witnesses to their character in case questions were asked later. "All right," Caleb said, backing into the cave. "Come on in. Fire's warm." The three men approached slowly, scanning the rocks as they walked. They were nervous. Caleb could see it in their jerky movements, the way their eyes never stopped moving. They sensed something was wrong even if they couldn't see what. "Cozy place you got here," Silas said, ducking into the cave. His two companions followed, one of them immediately moving to block the entrance. "Live out here all alone. Just me. No family, no friends. Dead. 3 years now." Something flickered in Silas's eyes. Calculation. "Sorry to hear that, boy. Must be lonely." "I manage." The second man, younger with a patchy beard and shaking hands, started rifling through Caleb's meager belongings. "Ain't got nothing here, Silas. Some dried meat, a few blankets. That's it. Then we take what there is." Silas's friendly mask was slipping. "And maybe the boy comes with us. Always useful to have someone who knows the mountains." "I ain't going nowhere with you." Silas moved faster than Caleb expected. One moment he was standing by the fire, the next his hand was wrapped around Caleb's throat, shoving him against the cave wall. "Wasn't asking, boy." The scar on his face twisted as he smiled. "See, me and my friends got ourselves in a bit of trouble. Need to disappear for a while, and you're gonna help us do that. Let me go." "Or what?" Silas laughed. "You gonna fight me? Look at you, skin and bones and nothing else." He leaned closer, his breath hot and sour against Caleb's face. "Here's what's gonna happen. You're gonna pack up whatever you got, and you're gonna lead us through these mountains to the border. And if you try anything stupid, I'll gut you like a fish and leave you for the wolves." The third man, who'd been watching the entrance, suddenly stiffened. "Silas, something ain't right." "What?" "I don't know. Just feels like we're being watched." Silas's grip tightened on Caleb's throat. "That true boy. Someone else out there." This was the moment, the turning point. Caleb could feel the weight of Ayana's stone in his pocket, could almost hear Maka's voice telling him to trust the plan. "Yeah," he said hoarsely. "There is." Silas's eyes narrowed. "Who?" "The family of the girl you shot." For a heartbeat, nobody moved. Then Silas's face went white, and he spun toward the cave entrance just as the first arrow buried itself in the dirt at his feet. "Don't move," Maka's voice echoed off the rocks, seeming to come from everywhere at once. "Drop your weapons, now." The younger criminal's nerve broke immediately. He threw his rifle to the ground and raised his hands, tears already streaming down his face. "Don't kill me. Please, God, don't kill me." But Silas and the third man weren't surrendering. They dragged Caleb with them as they backed toward the cave wall, using him as a shield. "Nice try, boy," Silas hissed in his ear. "But you just signed your own death warrant." Caleb could feel the cold barrel of a pistol pressed against his temple. His heart was hammering so hard he thought it might burst out of his chest. This wasn't how the plan was supposed to go. He was supposed to be safe by now, supposed to be watching from the sidelines while Maka's warriors handled everything. But nothing ever went according to plan. He should have remembered that. "Let the boy go," Maka called out. "He is under our protection." "Protection?" Silas laughed wildly. "This scrawny thing. What's he to you? He saved my daughter's life. That makes him family." "Family?" The word came out like a curse. "Well, your family's got a gun to his head. So here's how this is gonna work. You're gonna let us walk out of here, and when we're clear of the mountains, we'll let the boy go. Everybody wins. If you hurt him, you die. There is no escape." "Maybe, but I'll take him with me." Silas's arm tightened around Caleb's neck. "What do you say, Chief? You willing to gamble his life on your aim?" The silence stretched out like a blade. Caleb could feel his consciousness starting to fade as Silas's grip cut off his air. He had maybe 30 seconds before he blacked out. Maybe less. In that moment, something strange happened. The fear didn't disappear, but it shifted, became smaller, less important. He thought about his parents dead in unmarked graves outside a mining camp. He thought about Ayanna bleeding in the snow, trusting a stranger to carry her home. He thought about Maka offering him food and calling him brother, even though they'd only just met. Family. That's what they'd given him. A reason to live, a reason to fight, and a reason to take a risk. Caleb went completely limp, letting his full weight drop suddenly. Silas caught off guard, stumbled forward, and in that split second of imbalance, Caleb drove his elbow back as hard as he could into the man's stomach. The gun went off. Caleb felt the bullet whisper past his ear so close he could feel the heat of it. Then he was on the ground, rolling away, and arrows were flying, and someone was screaming, and the world dissolved into chaos. When the noise finally stopped, Caleb found himself lying on his back, staring up at the cave ceiling. His ears were ringing. His whole body was shaking. But he was alive. Somehow, impossibly, he was alive. Maka appeared above him, blocking out the light. "Are you hurt?" Caleb took stock of himself. Bruised throat, racing heart, ears that wouldn't stop ringing. But no blood. No holes where holes shouldn't be. "I don't think so." "Good." The chief reached down and pulled him to his feet. That was either very brave or very stupid. Probably both. Maka's weathered face cracked into something that might have been a smile. Probably. Caleb looked around the cave. The young criminal was still on his knees, hands raised, sobbing uncontrollably. The third man was face down in the dirt, with 2 arrows in his back, not moving. And Silas? Silas was still alive, but barely. An arrow had taken him through the shoulder, pinning him to the cave wall, like an insect in a collection. His pistol lay on the ground, well out of reach. Blood was seeping down his coat, turning the dirt beneath him into mud. "Should have just walked away, boy," Silas gasped, his face twisted with pain and hatred. "Should have minded your own business." Caleb walked over to where the man hung, looking into those hate-filled eyes. He thought about all the people this man had hurt: Marshal Crawford, the Army Patrol, Ayanna, countless others he'd never know about. He thought about how easy it would be to let Maka's warriors finish the job, how nobody would blame him. "Yeah," he said finally. "Maybe I should have. But then I'd be just like you." He turned his back on Silas and walked out of the cave into the cold morning air. The crying criminal talked. His name was Billy Thornton. He was 22 years old, and he'd made the worst decision of his life 6 weeks ago when he'd agreed to ride with Silas Blackwood for a share of gold claim money. He told them everything without being asked. The marshal they'd killed, the Army Patrol, they'd ambushed the native hunting camp they'd attacked on their way up the mountain. "I never killed nobody," Billy kept saying, rocking back and forth where he sat with his hands bound behind his back. "I just held the horses. I never pulled no trigger." "You took their blood money?" Maka said coldly. "You watched them murder innocent people and did nothing." "I was scared. Silas said he'd kill me if I tried to leave." "And now you will tell the soldiers exactly what happened. Every detail, every death." The chief's voice left no room for argument. "If you lie, if you leave out even a single truth, we will know, and we will find you." Billy nodded frantically. Yes, I'll tell them everything. I swear." Caleb stood off to the side, watching the interrogation with a mixture of exhaustion and unease. Everything had happened so fast. 1 minute he was eating breakfast, the next he was watching men die. The contrast made his head spin. A hand touched his shoulder. He turned to find Dakota standing beside him, the young warrior's face unreadable. "You fought well," Dakota said. "That move with your body weight, where did you learn it?" "Nowhere. Just instinct, I guess." "Good instincts." Dakota studied him for a moment. I was wrong about you. Wrong how? When the chief first told us we were hunting a white boy who had helped his daughter, I thought—" He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I thought he was being foolish, that you would betray us the first chance you got. And now I think perhaps you are the fool." A ghost of a smile crossed Dakota's lips. A fool who throws himself at armed men with nothing but his elbows. But a brave fool. That counts for something. Before Caleb could respond, a warrior came running up the slope from the eastern lookout point. He spoke rapidly in Lakota, his words tumbling over each other in apparent urgency. Maka's face went tight. He turned to Caleb. "We have a problem." "What kind of problem?" "The soldiers. They are coming, much faster than we expected." Caleb felt ice form in his stomach. "How long?" "An hour, perhaps less." Maka looked around at his warriors, at the bound criminal, at the bodies that still lay in and around the cave. "We do not have time to move everything, to clean this place." "Then we don't clean it." Caleb's mind was racing, scrambling for solutions. "We make it look like something else." "Like what?" "Like a rescue." He pointed to Billy. "He's already decided to cooperate, right? So we changed the story. You didn't come here for vengeance. You came here because your scouts spotted armed criminals in the mountains, and you wanted to protect the settlers in the area." "Protect settlers?" One of the older warriors spat. "Why would we protect those who have taken everything from us?" "Because that's what makes it believable." Caleb stepped forward, feeling a strange energy flowing through him. This was what he was good at. Thinking fast, finding angles, surviving. Everyone expects you to want revenge. They won't expect you to be the heroes. Maka was quiet for a long moment, considering. His warriors watched him, waiting for guidance. "The soldiers will not believe us," the chief said finally. "They will see what they want to see: savages with weapons standing over dead white men." "Not if I'm the one telling the story." Caleb met his eyes. "I'm the witness. Remember the white boy who saw everything. If I say you came to help me, if I say you saved my life when those criminals tried to take me hostage—" He shrugged. "Who are they gonna believe, me or their own prejudice? You would lie for us. I'd tell a version of the truth that keeps everyone alive. There's a difference." Maka studied his face for what felt like an eternity. Then slowly he nodded. "You are a strange boy, Caleb Brennan, but perhaps strange is what we need right now." He turned to his warriors and began issuing orders in rapid Lakota. The transformation was remarkable. Within minutes, the scene around the cave had changed completely. The dead criminal's body was moved to a more defensible position, making it look like he'd been shot while attacking. Silas was bound and gagged, his wound roughly bandaged alive to face trial as the soldiers would want. Billy was coached on exactly what to say, his terror making him an extremely cooperative witness. And the warriors themselves. They scattered into the rocks, leaving only Maka and 3 others visible, a hunting party, nothing more. Certainly not a war band seeking vengeance. By the time the cavalry crested the ridge, everything was ready. Captain Morrison led 20 soldiers in formation, their blue uniforms stark against the white snow. They reined in their horses 100 yards from the cave, hands on weapons, eyes scanning for threats. "Hello there," the captain called out. "I'm Captain Morrison, Territorial Cavalry. We're tracking dangerous criminals in this area. Anyone injured?" Caleb stepped forward, playing his role perfectly. "Captain, thank God you're here." What followed was the most convincing performance of Caleb's life. He told the captain everything, or at least the version of everything he and Maka had agreed on. 3 armed men had come to his cave at dawn, demanding supplies and threatening violence. They'd taken him hostage, meaning to use him as a guide through the mountains. But before they could leave, a Lakota hunting party had stumbled onto the situation. "They didn't have to help," Caleb said, letting his voice shake with genuine emotion. "Could have just ridden past, figured it wasn't their business, But the chief, he saw what was happening and he gestured vaguely toward Maka. He gave orders to his men. They waited until they had a clear shot, and then... Captain Morrison listened to the whole story with narrowed eyes. When Caleb finished, the officer walked over to where Silas lay still conscious despite his wound. "This true?" Morrison asked. "You took this boy hostage." Silas glared up at him with pure hatred, but said nothing. "He confessed to killing Marshal Crawford," Caleb added, "when he thought he was going to get away clean. Bragged about it, actually." The captain's expression hardened. "Is that so?" He straightened up and turned to his men. "Get these two onto horses. They'll stand trial in Silverton." "What about the natives?" one of the soldiers asked, eyeing Maka's warriors with obvious suspicion. Morrison looked at the chief for a long moment. Something passed between them, an acknowledgement perhaps of the complicated reality they both inhabited. "They helped take down federal criminals," the captain said finally. "That makes them allies today, not enemies." He nodded to Maka. "Thank you for your assistance. It'll be noted in my report." Maka inclined his head slightly. "We wish only to live in peace. When men bring violence to these mountains, it threatens all of us." "Fair enough." Morrison turned back to Caleb. "Son, you've had quite a morning. My men can escort you down to Silverton if you want. Get you a hot meal, a real bed." Caleb thought about it. A hot meal. A real bed. Things he hadn't had in years. Then he looked at Maka, at Dakota, at the warriors who'd risked everything to help him when they had no reason to. "Thank you, Captain, but I think I'll stay here." Morrison raised an eyebrow. "In a cave, winter's coming hard." "I know." Caleb smiled slightly. "But I've got friends here. That's worth more than any bed." The captain studied him for a moment, then shrugged. "Suit yourself. If you change your mind, Silverton's 2 days' ride southeast." Within the hour, the soldiers were gone, taking their prisoners with them. The sound of horses faded into the distance, leaving silence in their wake. Caleb let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "You did well," Maka said, coming to stand beside him. "Better than I expected." "Had good teachers." The chief was quiet for a moment. Then, "What you said to the soldier, about having friends here, did you mean it?" Caleb thought about the question. 24 hours ago, he'd been alone in the world with nothing but his knife and his determination to see him through. Now he had people who'd fought for him, bled for him, called him brother. It terrified him, but it also felt like coming home. "Yeah," he said softly. "I meant it." Maka nodded slowly. "Then come. My daughter has been asking about you, and our winter camp has room for one more." They walked together into the mountains, the carved stone warm in Caleb's pocket, while somewhere above them, an eagle circled against the cold blue sky. The winter camp was larger than Caleb had expected. 40 lodges spread across a sheltered valley, protected from the worst of the mountain winds by steep ridges on 3 sides. Smoke rose from cooking fires, and the sound of children's laughter echoed off the rocks, a sound Caleb hadn't heard in 3 years. It hit him harder than he'd anticipated, that laughter, made something twist in his chest that he couldn't name. "You look like a man seeing ghosts," Maka said as they walked between the lodges. "Maybe I am." The chief didn't ask what he meant. Perhaps he already knew. People stopped what they were doing to stare as Caleb passed. Women paused their work hands frozen over hides they were scraping. Old men watched from beneath heavy brows, their weathered faces giving nothing away. Children pointed and whispered only to be hushed by their mothers. Caleb kept his eyes forward, trying not to flinch under the weight of all those gazes. He was an outsider here, a white face in a sea of brown. No matter what Maka said about brotherhood, that fact wouldn't change overnight. "They are curious," Maka said, reading his discomfort. "Most have never seen a white man up close who was not holding a weapon." "Ain't exactly making me feel better." "It should. It means they see you differently already." They stopped in front of a lodge near the center of the camp, larger than the others, and decorated with symbols Caleb didn't recognize. Before Maka could announce their arrival, the entrance flap flew open and Ayana emerged. She looked different than she had in the snow. Stronger. Her leg was bandaged properly now, and she moved with only a slight limp. But it was her eyes that struck Caleb most bright and fierce, and very much alive. "You came," she said, as if she hadn't quite believed it would happen. "Your father's pretty persuasive." "My father is a stubborn old bear who usually gets what he wants." She shot Maka a look that was equal parts affection and exasperation. "I told him to invite you, not drag you here like a prisoner." "I wasn't dragged. I was—" Caleb searched for the right word. "Encouraged." Ayana's lips twitched. "Is that what they're calling it now?" Despite everything, Caleb felt himself smile. There was something about this girl, this chief's daughter, who'd nearly died in the snow, that made him feel less alone. Like maybe the world wasn't as cold as he'd convinced himself it was. "You should rest," Maka said, breaking the moment. "Both of you. The council will want to meet our guest tonight, and I need him presentable." "Council?" Caleb's smile faded. "What council?" "The elders of our band. They must formally accept you into the tribe, or the spirit stone means nothing." Maka's expression was serious. "Do not worry. I will speak for you. But they will have questions." "What kind of questions?" "The kind that determine whether you live among us as family or leave as a stranger." The chief turned and walked away before Caleb could respond, leaving him standing awkwardly in front of Ayana's lodge. "He's not very comforting," Caleb muttered. "He's a chief. Comfort isn't his job." Ayana gestured toward the lodge entrance. "Come inside. You look like you're about to collapse." She wasn't wrong. The exhaustion of the past 2 days was catching up with him, turning his legs to lead and his thoughts to mud. He followed her into the lodge without argument. The interior was warm and surprisingly spacious, with thick furs covering the ground and a small fire burning in the center. An old woman sat near the back, working beads into a piece of leather. She looked up when Caleb entered, her wrinkled face showing no surprise. "Grandmother," Ayana said in English, presumably for Caleb's benefit, "this is the boy I told you about, Caleb Brennan." The old woman studied him with sharp black eyes that seemed to see straight through his skin. "You are smaller than I expected." "I get that a lot." She returned to her beadwork. "Sit. Eat. You will need strength for what comes." Caleb sat where she indicated, accepting a bowl of something hot and meaty that Ayana pressed into his hands. He didn't ask what it was. At this point, he'd eat anything. "The council," he said between mouthfuls. "What do I need to know?" Ayana settled across from him, her injured leg stretched out carefully. "There are 7 elders. 3 support my father without question. 2 are uncertain. And 2—" She hesitated. "And 2 what?" "2 hate everything white men represent. They lost family at Sand Creek, at Washita. They've watched our lands shrink and our people die for 30 years. Her voice was soft but unflinching. "They will not welcome you easily." "Great, so I've got a 50-50 shot at best." "Worse. The uncertain ones usually follow Crowfeather's lead, and Crowfeather lost his son to a settler's bullet last spring." Ayana met his eyes. "He will test you, Caleb. Push you to see what you're made of. If you show weakness, he will use it against you. And if I show strength, then he might respect you enough to give you a chance." She paused. "Or he might see you as a threat and try to have you banished." Caleb stared at his bowl, suddenly not hungry anymore. "I don't understand. Your father accepted me. Why isn't that enough?" "Because my father is not a tyrant. He leads by consensus, not command. If the council refuses you, he cannot override them without breaking trust with his own people." Ayana's hand reached out, touching his arm briefly. "But the council is not unfair. They will listen. They will judge you by your actions, not your skin. You just have to show them who you truly are. That's what I'm afraid of, Caleb admitted. What if who I truly am isn't good enough? The old woman spoke without looking up from her work. That question is the only one that matters, white boy, and only you can answer it. The council fire burned high as the sun set behind the mountains. 7 elders sat in a semicircle, their faces painted with ceremonial markings that made them look ancient and unknowable. Maka sat at the center, flanked by 2 men who watched Caleb with expressions of mild curiosity. On the far right sat an older warrior with a face like carved granite and eyes that burned with barely contained hostility. Crowfeather. It had to be. Caleb stood before them feeling smaller than he'd ever felt in his life. The entire camp had gathered to watch hundreds of faces illuminated by firelight, all focused on the white boy who'd somehow stumbled into their world. Caleb Brennan. Maka began, his voice carrying across the gathered crowd. You stand before the council of our people to answer for your actions and declare your intentions. Do you understand? I understand. You saved the life of my daughter Ayana. For this I have named you brother, and given you the protection of the Spirit Stone. But my word alone cannot make you one of us. Maka gestured to the other elders. The council must decide whether you are worthy of that honor. Crowfeather spoke before anyone else could. Worthy. His English was heavily accented, but perfectly clear. A white boy worthy to walk among the people who have been slaughtered by his kind for generations. I didn't slaughter anyone, Caleb said quietly. No. And your fathers, your grandfathers. The men who came before you with their guns and their diseases, and their endless hunger for land that was never theirs. Crowfeather's voice rose. My son was the same age as you when a settler shot him for crossing the wrong piece of dirt. Tell me, white boy, what makes you different from the man who killed my child? The question hung in the air like smoke. Caleb could feel every eye on him waiting for his response. Nothing, he said finally. The crowd murmured. Even Maka looked surprised. Nothing makes me different, Caleb continued. I'm white. I come from the same people who've been taking your land and killing your families. I can't change that. I can't undo what's been done. He took a breath. But I can tell you what I know. I know what it feels like to bury everyone you love. I know what it feels like to be alone in the world, with nothing and nobody. And I know what it feels like to find someone who needs help and decide to give it even when it might cost you everything. Crowfeather's expression didn't soften. Pretty words. White men are good at pretty words. Then don't listen to my words. Look at what I did. Caleb's voice steadied something hard and certain rising up from deep inside him. I found your chief's daughter bleeding in the snow. I could have walked away. Should have probably if I wanted to stay safe. But I didn't. I carried her through Dead Man's Pass in the middle of winter with no food and no warm clothes, because leaving her to die wasn't something I could live with. You expect gratitude for basic decency? I don't expect anything. I never have. Caleb stepped forward close enough to see the firelight dancing in Crowfeather's hostile eyes. But I'll tell you this, the men who shot Ayana, the men who killed Marshal Crawford and attacked your hunting camp, they're in chains right now because of what happened on that mountain. Not because of me. Because your warriors were brave and your chief was smart and we worked together instead of against each other. That's what I know, and that's what I want to be part of. Silence. The fire crackled and popped, sending sparks spiraling into the dark sky. One of the uncertain elders, a woman with silver-streaked hair and kind eyes, spoke softly. You are young to have buried your family. How old were you, P? 14. And you have lived alone since then. 3 winters with no one to help you. No one to teach you. Yes, ma'am. She tilted her head, studying him. Among our people, such a child would never be abandoned. The tribe would raise him as their own. It is cruel what your people do, leaving children to fend for themselves in the wilderness. My people didn't leave me. They died. The words came out sharper than Caleb intended, carrying 3 years of grief and anger. The fever didn't care who was kind and who was cruel. It just took everyone. The elder woman nodded slowly. Sickness is no respecter of goodness. We have learned this many times. She looked at the other elders. This boy has suffered as our own children have suffered. He has shown courage and compassion when it would have been easier to turn away. I believe he has earned the right to be heard. Crowfeather made a disgusted sound. One act of kindness does not erase centuries of blood. No, Maka agreed. But it is a beginning. Every journey starts with a single step, my friend. You know this as well as anyone. The old warrior's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. I call for the test. Another elder said, a thin man with elaborate scars on his cheeks. Let the boy prove himself in the way of our ancestors. Caleb's stomach dropped. Test what test? Maka's expression was grave. When an outsider seeks to join our people, they must prove their commitment. It is an old tradition, rarely used, but... He glanced at Crowfeather. Some feel it is necessary. What do I have to do? The scarred elder answered. You must spend 3 nights alone on the Spirit Mountain. No food, no water, no weapons. If the spirits accept you, you will return alive. If they do not, I die. Perhaps. Or perhaps you simply leave and never return. Either way, the question of your worthiness will be answered. Caleb looked around the circle of faces, searching for any sign that this was a joke or a test he'd already passed. There was none. When do I start? Tomorrow at dawn. Maka rose, signaling the end of the council. Rest well tonight, Caleb Brennan. The mountain will show no mercy. Caleb didn't sleep. He lay in the lodge Maka had assigned him, staring at the smoke hole and listening to the sounds of the camp settling into silence. His mind kept circling back to what waited for him in the morning. 3 nights on a mountain with nothing. No food, no water, no weapons. He'd survived worse. Probably. Maybe. A soft sound at the lodge entrance made him tense. He reached for his knife before remembering it had been taken along with his other belongings. It's me, Ayana's voice whispered. Caleb relaxed slightly. Your father know you're here. My father is not the boss of me. She slipped inside, moving carefully on her injured leg, and sat beside his sleeping mat. I wanted to talk to you before tomorrow. Talk about what? The Spirit Mountain. What to expect. She was quiet for a moment. I did the vigil when I was 13. All our young people do when they come of age. It's how we find our spirit name, our purpose. How bad was it? The first night is the hardest. Your body screams for food and water and your mind plays tricks on you. You see things that aren't there. Hear voices. Ayana's hand found his in the darkness. But if you can push through that, the second night is easier. The hunger fades. The fear fades. You start to see clearly. See what? Whatever you need to see. For me, it was my mother. Her voice caught slightly. She died when I was 7. I barely remembered her face. But on that mountain she came to me. Told me things I'd never heard before. Things only she would know. How is that possible? I don't know. Maybe it's the spirits. Maybe it's something inside us that only comes out when everything else is stripped away. She squeezed his hand. But I know this, the mountain doesn't want to kill you. It wants to show you who you really are. If you can accept that, truly accept it, you'll survive. And if I can't, then you'll run. And running on the Spirit Mountain is the one thing that will kill you. She leaned closer, her breath warm against his cheek. Promise me you won't run. Ayana, promise me. Caleb thought about all the times he'd run in his life. From the fever camp when the bodies piled too high. From settlements where people looked at him like he was less than human. from connections that might have saved him because he was too afraid to trust anyone with his broken heart. "I promise," he said. She stayed with him until the sky began to lighten, talking quietly about her people, her family, the dreams she'd had for her life before everything got complicated. Caleb listened without saying much, content, just to hear another human voice in the darkness. When she finally left, the sun was a thin gold line on the horizon, and Caleb felt something he hadn't felt in years: hope. They took him up the mountain at dawn. 4 warriors escorted him, Dakota among them, to a flat stone outcropping near the peak. The wind was brutal up here, cutting through Caleb's thin clothes like they weren't even there. Below, the valley stretched out in a patchwork of white and brown, impossibly distant. "This is where you stay," Dakota said, gesturing to the bare stone. "Do not leave this place until 3 suns have risen and set. We will come for you then. And if I'm dead, then we will honor your spirit and speak well of you to those who remain." Dakota's expression was unreadable, but something in his voice suggested he didn't expect that outcome. "Good luck, brother." The warriors left without looking back, their forms shrinking rapidly as they descended the mountain. Within minutes, Caleb was alone. Completely, utterly alone. The first hours weren't bad. He'd spent plenty of time alone in his life, and the novelty of the situation kept his mind occupied. He explored the small outcropping, finding cracks in the rock that offered slight protection from the wind. He watched eagles circle overhead, their cries echoing off the peaks. But as the sun climbed higher, the hunger started. It began as a gnawing emptiness in his stomach, familiar from countless lean days in his mountain cave. But this was different. Knowing he couldn't eat, couldn't even look for food, made the sensation sharper, more insistent. By midday, his mouth was dry as dust, and his head had started to pound. He could see snow on the rocks around him, could imagine scooping it up and letting it melt on his tongue. But the rules had been clear. No water. "This is stupid," he muttered to himself. 3 days without water can kill a man. But Ayanna had done it. All the young people of the tribe had done it. If they could survive, so could he. The sun set slowly, painting the sky in shades of red and gold that seemed to mock his suffering. As darkness fell, the temperature dropped sharply, and Caleb curled into the smallest crack he could find, trying to conserve body heat. Sleep came in fragments, interrupted by shivering and strange dreams. He saw his mother's face twisted with fever. He saw his father digging graves in frozen ground, tears freezing on his cheeks. He saw Samuel, his little brother, asking why the medicine wasn't working, why the doctors weren't coming, why God was letting everyone die. Caleb woke, gasping, his heart pounding against his ribs. The sky was still dark, but there was a quality to the darkness that suggested dawn wasn't far off. He'd survived the first night. The second day was worse. His tongue felt swollen in his mouth, and his thoughts moved slowly like they were wading through thick mud. The hunger had transformed into something beyond physical, a hollow ache that seemed to encompass his entire being. But underneath the suffering, something else was happening. The world around him seemed sharper, more real. He could see individual ice crystals glittering on the rocks, could hear the whisper of wind through cracks he hadn't noticed before. Time stretched and compressed in strange ways, hours passing like minutes, while minutes lasted for hours. As the sun reached its peak, Caleb saw something that made him question his sanity. A figure stood at the edge of the outcropping. A woman in a simple dress, her hair blowing in a wind that Caleb couldn't feel. She was watching him with an expression of infinite tenderness. "Mama." The word came out as a croak, barely audible. The figure didn't answer, but she smiled. And in that smile, Caleb saw everything he'd lost, everything he'd been running from for 3 years. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm sorry I couldn't save you. Any of you." The figure moved closer, close enough that he could almost touch her. When she spoke, her voice seemed to come from inside his own head. "You were 14 years old, Caleb. A child. What could you have done? Something. Anything. You did everything you could. You stayed when others ran. You buried us with your own hands when no one else would touch the bodies. The figure knelt beside him, her eyes his mother's eyes filled with love. You have nothing to be sorry for. Then why does it hurt so much? Because you're still alive, and truly living, means carrying the weight of those we've lost. She reached out her hand, passing through his cheek like mist. But you don't have to carry it alone anymore. Do you understand? Caleb closed his eyes and tears he'd held back for 3 years finally fell. I'm so tired, Mama. So tired of being alone. I know, sweetheart, but look at where you are. Look at who you've become. The voice was fading now, growing distant. You found people who see you, who want you. Don't be afraid to let them in. When Caleb opened his eyes, the figure was gone. But the weight in his chest felt different. Lighter somehow, like something that had been locked away had finally been released. He slept. The third night, Caleb dreamed of fire. He was standing in the middle of the tribal camp, but it was burning. Lodges collapsed in on themselves, sending cascades of sparks into the dark sky. People ran screaming, women clutching children, old men falling beneath the hooves of horses ridden by shadows. And in the center of it all, he saw Ayanna. She was fighting a knife in each hand, her face twisted with fury and fear. But there were too many of them, soldiers, settlers, men with hate in their hearts and guns in their hands. They surrounded her, closing in, and Caleb tried to run toward her, but his legs wouldn't move. "Caleb!" she screamed. "Help me!" He fought against the invisible force holding him in place, fought with everything he had, but it wasn't enough. It was never enough. He watched her fall, watched the blood spread across the snow, watched the light leave her eyes. "No!" The word tore from his throat as he jerked awake, his heart hammering wildly. Dawn was breaking over the mountains, painting the sky in soft shades of pink and gold. The third sun was rising. He'd made it. But the dream clung to him like a shroud, filling him with a dread he couldn't shake. Something was wrong. Something was coming. He heard them before he saw them, hoofbeats echoing off the rocks, coming fast. Too fast. The warriors weren't supposed to arrive until mid-morning, and they wouldn't be running their horses on this terrain. Caleb pushed himself to his feet, swaying with weakness, and looked down the mountain. 4 riders were climbing toward him, but they weren't Lakota. They were soldiers. Caleb's blood ran cold as the riders came into clear view. Blue uniforms, army insignia, rifles held ready. They moved with the purposeful efficiency of men on a mission. "There he is!" one of them shouted, pointing toward Caleb's outcropping. "The witness! Witness!" The word triggered something in Caleb's exhausted mind. The trial. Silas and Billy were supposed to stand trial in Silverton. These soldiers must be here to take him as a witness. But something felt wrong. Captain Morrison had offered to escort him to town days ago and accepted his refusal. Why send men now to this remote mountain for testimony, unless the trial wasn't going the way someone wanted? Caleb Brennan. The lead soldier reined in his horse at the base of the outcropping. "You need to come with us. Now." "Who sent you?" "Captain Morrison. There's been a development. The prisoners escaped last night." Caleb's stomach dropped. "Escaped both of them." Silas killed 2 guards and took Billy with him. They're heading back into the mountains. The soldier's voice carried an edge of something that didn't sound quite right. Too rehearsed. Too smooth. "Captain needs you to help track them." Every instinct Caleb had honed over 3 years of survival was screaming at him now. Something about this was wrong. The timing. The story. The way the soldiers kept glancing at each other like men sharing a secret. "How'd you know where to find me?" "Captain Morrison told us. Said you'd be up here on some kind of test." But Caleb hadn't told anyone except Ayanna where he'd be. And Maka. And the warriors who'd escorted him up the mountain. The soldiers were lying. "I can't leave yet," Caleb said, stalling for time. "The test isn't finished. Son, this is a military matter. Your little tribal ceremony can wait. Little tribal ceremony. The dismissiveness in those words confirmed Caleb's suspicion. These weren't men who respected the Lakota. These weren't men who saw them as anything but savages. Who are you really working for? The lead soldier's expression hardened. I'm asking nicely one more time. Come with us or we'll make you. Caleb looked at the four armed men, then at his own empty hands. He was weak from 3 days without food or water. He had no weapons, no way to fight, no way to run. But he had something else. He had a family waiting for him at the bottom of this mountain. A family he'd just learned to trust. Make me then, he said quietly. The soldiers exchanged glances. Then the leader smiled, and it was the coldest smile Caleb had ever seen. Have it your way. The first soldier dismounted before Caleb could react. 3 days without food or water had left his reflexes slow, his muscles weak. He tried to dodge, but the soldier's fist connected with his jaw and sent him sprawling across the cold stone. Stars exploded behind his eyes. Should have come quietly, boy. The soldier grabbed a fistful of Caleb's hair and yanked his head back. Would have been easier on everyone. Who sent you? Caleb gasped through the pain. Who are you really working for? Doesn't matter. What matters is you're coming with us, and you're going to keep your mouth shut about what happened on that mountain. The soldier's breath was hot against Caleb's face. The chief's daughter, the warriors, none of that ever happened. Understand? Caleb understood perfectly. Someone wanted the truth buried. Someone with enough power to send men in army uniforms to kidnap a witness from tribal land. Go to hell. The soldier hit him again, harder this time. Blood filled Caleb's mouth, copper and salt. Tie him up, the leader ordered. We're running out of time. Rough hands grabbed Caleb's wrists, wrenching them behind his back. He struggled weakly, but there was nothing left in him. The spirit quest had drained everything he had. He thought of Ayanna, of the promise he'd made not to run. He wasn't running, but he was losing anyway. Someone's coming. One of the soldiers pointed down the mountain. Riders. A lot of them. The leader cursed viciously. How many? I count 15, maybe 20, moving fast. 20 riders could only mean one thing. Maka's warriors had seen the soldiers climbing the mountain. They were coming. Get him on a horse, now. They hauled Caleb upright and threw him across the back of a horse like a sack of grain. His ribs screamed in protest, and for a moment he thought he might pass out. He bit down hard on his tongue, using the pain to stay conscious. The leader grabbed the horse's reins and spurred his own mount forward. Ride, don't stop for anything. They flew down the opposite side of the mountain, taking a path so steep that Caleb had to close his eyes to keep from being sick. Every hoofbeat jolted through his battered body. Every breath was a struggle against the position he'd been thrown in. Behind them he heard shouts. War cries. The sound of pursuit growing closer. They're gaining, one of the soldiers yelled. Shut up and ride. An arrow whistled past Caleb's head, close enough that he felt the wind of its passage. Then another. The soldiers were cursing now, fear replacing their earlier confidence. We can't outrun them. We don't have to outrun them. We just have to reach the canyon. The canyon. Caleb's blood ran cold. These men had an escape route planned. A way out of tribal territory where Maka's warriors couldn't follow without risking war with the settlers on the other side. If they reached that canyon, he was dead. They'd never let him live to tell what really happened. He had to do something. Anything. The carved stone was still in his pocket. They hadn't searched him, hadn't thought to check what a half-dead boy might be carrying. Caleb twisted his bound hands, straining against the rope, trying to reach the pocket of his trousers. His fingers brushed leather, then fabric, then there, the smooth warmth of the spirit stone against his palm. He didn't know what he expected it to do. It was just a rock after all, a symbol, nothing more. But as his fingers closed around it, something changed. The weakness that had plagued him for 3 days seemed to lift. Not completely. He was still exhausted, still hurt, still bound, but enough. Enough to think clearly. Enough to see an opportunity. The path ahead curved sharply around a massive boulder. For just a moment, the soldiers would be single file, unable to see each other. Caleb waited until the lead horse started around the curve. Then he threw himself sideways off the horse's back. He hit the ground hard, rolling across rocks and ice, his bound hands making it impossible to protect himself. Pain exploded through his shoulder, his hip, his skull. But he kept rolling, kept moving, until he fetched up against the base of a pine tree. The boy! He's loose! Caleb scrambled to his feet, his vision swimming, and ran. He couldn't go far, not with his hands tied behind his back and his body screaming for rest, but he didn't have to. He just had to buy time. He crashed through underbrush, stumbling over roots and rocks, hearing the soldiers curse and dismount behind him. They were following on foot now, the terrain too rough for horses. Spread out! Cut him off! Caleb ducked behind a fallen log, pressing himself flat against the frozen ground. His lungs burned. His heart hammered so loud he was sure they could hear it. Footsteps approached, heavy boots crunching through snow. One of the soldiers moving slowly, rifle raised. Come out, boy. You're only making this worse. Caleb held his breath. The soldier passed within 3 feet of his hiding place, close enough that Caleb could see the mud on his boots. Then he moved on, searching the wrong direction. Thank God. Thank every God that might be listening. But Caleb couldn't stay hidden forever. The soldiers would find him eventually, or he'd freeze to death in the snow. He needed help. As if in answer to a prayer, a hand clamped over his mouth. Caleb nearly screamed, but then he heard Ayana's voice in his ear. Don't move. She was pressed against his back, her body shielding him from view. He had no idea how she'd found him, how she'd gotten here so fast, but in that moment, he didn't care. She was here. She'd come for him. 4 men, she whispered. I saw them take you. My father is coming, but he's still minutes away. Caleb tried to speak, but her hand pressed harder against his mouth. Listen to me. There's a ravine 20 yards to your left. It drops into a cave system. We can hide there until my father arrives. He nodded to show he understood. Good. When I say run, you run. Don't look back. She released him and pressed a knife into his bound hands. Cut yourself free. We'll need both of us fighting if this goes wrong. Caleb sawed at the ropes while Ayana peered over the log, tracking the soldier's movements. His fingers were numb and clumsy, but desperation gave him strength. The rope parted just as one of the soldiers shouted. Over here, I found tracks. Run, Ayana said. They burst from cover together, sprinting toward the ravine she'd described. Behind them, rifles cracked and bullets whined through the air. Caleb's legs felt like they belonged to someone else, moving on pure instinct, while his mind went blank with terror. The ravine appeared without warning, a dark gash in the mountainside that dropped into blackness. Ayana didn't hesitate. She grabbed Caleb's hand and jumped. They fell for what felt like forever, though it couldn't have been more than a few seconds. Then they hit water ice, cold, shocking deep enough to break their fall without breaking their bones. Caleb surfaced, gasping the cold, driving the air from his lungs. Ayana was beside him, already swimming toward a rocky ledge that jutted out from the cave wall. Come on, they won't follow us in here. She was right. Above them, at the edge of the ravine, the soldiers were shouting at each other. Caleb heard the leader's voice raised in fury. We can't let him get away. He knows too much. You want to jump into that, be my guest. More arguing. Then finally the sound of footsteps retreating. Caleb hauled himself onto the ledge beside Ayana, his teeth chattering so hard he could barely speak. How did you find me? I saw them coming up the mountain at dawn. Soldiers with no escort, no messenger ahead of them. It was wrong. She was shivering too, but her voice was steady. I followed, saw them take you. You should have waited for your father. You would be dead if I'd waited for my father. She turned to face him, her dark eyes fierce in the dim light. I'm not losing you, Caleb Brennan, not after everything we've been through. Something passed between them in that moment. Something that transcended words or explanation. Caleb reached out his frozen fingers, brushing her cheek. Thank you. Thank me later. When we're warm and safe, and those men are far away. But she leaned into his touch just for a moment before pulling back. We need to move. These caves connect to the valley. We can reach my father's camp before nightfall if we're careful. The cave system was a labyrinth of twisting passages and underground streams. Ayanna moved through it with the confidence of someone who'd explored every inch since childhood. Caleb followed as best he could, his exhausted body, running on nothing but determination and the warmth of her hand in his. They didn't talk much. There wasn't breath to spare for words, but every time Caleb stumbled, Ayanna was there to catch him. Every time the darkness seemed to close in, she found a path forward. Hours passed, or maybe days. Caleb couldn't tell anymore. Time had lost all meaning in the endless dark. Finally, just when he thought he couldn't take another step, he saw light ahead. Real light. Sunlight filtering through a crack in the rock. Almost there, Ayanna said. Another 100 yards. They emerged from the cave into a small clearing surrounded by tall pines. The afternoon sun was warm on Caleb's face, and for a moment, he just stood there breathing, marveling at the simple miracle of being alive. Then he heard the horses. Maka burst into the clearing at the head of 20 warriors. His face twisted with an expression Caleb had never seen before. It took him a moment to recognize it. Fear. Ayanna. The chief was off his horse before it stopped moving, crossing the distance to his daughter in 3 long strides. He grabbed her shoulders, his hands shaking. Are you hurt? What happened? I'm fine, father. We're both fine. Maka pulled her into an embrace so fierce it looked almost painful. Over her shoulder, his eyes found Caleb. The soldiers. 4 men in army uniforms. They weren't real soldiers, at least I don't think so. They knew about the cave, about what really happened with Silas and his men. They wanted me to stay quiet about it. Where are they now? Lost them in the caves. But they won't stop looking. Caleb swayed on his feet. Someone sent them. Someone with power. If they're willing to kidnap a witness in broad daylight, then they're willing to do worse. Maka released Ayanna and stepped toward Caleb. His expression had shifted from fear to something harder. You were on the Spirit Mountain. Did you finish the test? 3 nights, 3 suns. The world was starting to spin. I saw things, my mother. The future, maybe. I don't... His legs gave out. Maka caught him before he hit the ground, lowering him gently to the grass. Water. Someone bring water. A canteen was pressed to Caleb's lips. He drank greedily, the liquid hitting his empty stomach like fire, but he didn't care. It was the sweetest thing he'd ever tasted. Easy, Maka said. Not too fast. Caleb forced himself to slow down. The council. Did I pass? You survived 3 nights without food, water, or shelter. You resisted enemies who tried to take you by force. You protected yourself without abandoning your promise. Maka's voice was solemn. You passed Caleb Brennan. The spirits have accepted you. Then I'm one of us, truly, forever. The chief gripped his shoulder. But that is not the only thing you have earned today. What do you mean? Maka looked at Ayanna, then back at Caleb. Something passed between father and daughter that Caleb couldn't quite read. My daughter has made her choice known to me, the chief said slowly. A choice that would bind our families together in a way that goes beyond the Spirit Stone. Caleb's exhausted mind struggled to understand. I don't... She wishes to speak with you. When you are rested, when you have strength enough to give her question the answer it deserves. Maka stood pulling Caleb to his feet. But for now you need food and warmth. The warriors will take you back to camp. What about the soldiers, the men who tried to take me? We will find them, and when we do... Maka's expression hardened. They will learn what it means to threaten those under our protection. The camp was in chaos when they arrived. Word had spread about the attack on the Spirit Mountain, and anger ran through the tribe like wildfire. Warriors gathered in small groups speaking in fierce whispers. Women clutched their children close. Fear and fury mingled on their faces. Caleb was taken to Maka's own lodge, the largest and warmest in the camp. He was given broth and bread, and piled with so many furs that he could barely move. Someone cleaned and bandaged the cuts on his face. Someone else brought a tea that smelled like sage and made his eyelids heavy. Through it all, Ayana stayed at his side. She didn't say much, just sat beside him, her hand resting on his arm, her presence a steady anchor in the storm of activity around them. "Your father said you wanted to talk to me." Caleb managed fighting to stay conscious. "About a choice." "Later." Her voice was soft. "Rest now." "But, Caleb Brennan, you have been awake for 3 days, beaten by soldiers, chased through the mountains, and nearly drowned in an underground river. Whatever I have to say can wait until you've slept." A hint of her usual sharpness crept into her tone. "Are you going to argue with me?" "Wouldn't dream of it." She smiled then, a real smile that reached her eyes and made something warm bloom in Caleb's chest, despite all the cold he'd endured. "Good. Then close your eyes and stop talking." He wanted to argue, wanted to know what she had to say, what choice she'd made, what any of it meant. But his body had other ideas. The warmth of the furs, the fullness in his stomach, the safety of being surrounded by people who cared whether he lived or died. It was too much to fight against. For the first time in 3 years, Caleb fell asleep feeling like he was exactly where he belonged. He dreamed of fire again. But this time the camp wasn't burning. This time the fire was in the center of the village, and people were gathered around it celebrating. Drums beat a rhythm that seemed to match his heartbeat. Voices raised in song, joyful and free. And beside him, holding his hand, was Ayana. "Is this real?" he asked her. She smiled. "Not yet, but it could be." When he woke, the lodge was dark except for a single candle burning near the entrance. Ayana was still beside him, but she'd fallen asleep, her head resting on her arms, her breathing slow and even. Caleb watched her for a long moment, feeling the weight of everything that had happened pressing down on him. A week ago, he'd been alone in the world, a ghost haunting the mountains, waiting to die without knowing it. Now he had a family, a people, a home, and maybe, just maybe, something more. The lodge flap opened and Maka stepped inside. He looked tired, lines of worry etched deep into his weathered face. When he saw Caleb awake, some of the tension eased. "How do you feel?" "Like I got trampled by a horse, but alive." Caleb pushed himself up on one elbow, careful not to disturb Ayana. "What happened with the soldiers?" "We tracked them to the edge of our territory. They met with other men settlers from the look of them. At least a dozen." Maka's jaw tightened. "They're building a camp near the eastern pass." "Building a camp, why?" "That is what we must discover." The chief settled cross-legged on the floor, suddenly looking less like a war leader and more like a tired father worried about his family. "These men are not random criminals, Caleb. They are organized, funded. They have a purpose." "What purpose?" "I have suspicions, but I need proof before I act." Maka's dark eyes met Caleb's. "That is why I need your help." "My help? I'm not exactly in fighting shape." "You don't need to fight. You need to think." Maka leaned forward. "You are the only one who can move between both worlds, mine and theirs. You understand how white men think, how they plan, what drives them. I need that understanding." Caleb was quiet for a moment, considering. "You think someone powerful is behind this, someone who wants the truth about Silas and his men buried?" "Yes." "But why? They were criminals, killers. Why would anyone care about protecting their reputation?" "Perhaps it is not their reputation being protected." Maka's voice dropped lower. "Perhaps they were working for someone else. Someone who cannot afford to have their connection exposed." The pieces clicked into place in Caleb's mind. Silas was wearing a marshal's badge. A dead marshal's badge. What if he didn't just kill Crawford for refusing a bribe? What if Crawford found out something he wasn't supposed to know? And was silenced for it? By someone with enough power to send fake soldiers into tribal territory. Caleb felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain cold. Someone who can cover up murders and manipulate the army. Maka nodded slowly. Now you see why I am worried. This is not just about 4 men in the mountains. This is about something much larger. Something that threatens all of us. Beside him, Ayanna stirred. Her eyes opened, finding Caleb's face first, then her father's. "You're plotting without me," she said, her voice thick with sleep. "We were waiting for you to wake," Maka replied. Liar. But she sat up, pulling a fur around her shoulders. "What did I miss?" Caleb told her everything, the theory about Marshal Crawford, the conspiracy, the threat that hung over all of them. She listened without interrupting, her expression growing more serious with each word. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "There's something you don't know," she said finally. "Something I saw in the caves." "What?" "When we were escaping, I took a wrong turn. Found a passage I'd never explored before." Ayanna's voice was careful, measured. "It led to a cavern, a big one. And there were things inside. Crates. Dozens of them. Marked with army insignia." Caleb's stomach dropped. Weapons. Rifles. Ammunition. Enough to arm a small army. She met her father's eyes. "Whoever these men are, they're not just trying to cover up a murder. They're preparing for something." The lodge fell silent. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the lodge poles and making the candle flame dance. Somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled a long, mournful sound that seemed to echo the dread settling into Caleb's bones. Whatever was coming, it was bigger than any of them had imagined, and they were running out of time to stop it. Maka called a war council before dawn. Caleb sat among the warriors, still weak from his ordeal, but unwilling to be left behind. Whatever was coming, he'd earned the right to face it. The spirit stone hung around his neck, now placed there by the Council of Elders in a brief ceremony that had made him officially, irrevocably, a member of the tribe. "The weapons cache changes everything," Maka said, his voice carrying to every corner of the lodge. "This is not a group of criminals hiding from justice. This is preparation for war." "War against who?" Dakota asked. "Us." The chief's face was grim. "Think about it. Armed men on our borders, false soldiers attempting to kidnap witnesses, weapons hidden in caves that only someone with knowledge of this land could have found." He paused. "Someone is planning to attack our people and make it look like self-defense." The warriors erupted in angry murmurs. Caleb felt sick. "They need a reason," he said, and the lodge fell silent. "To attack you openly, they need justification, something they can point to when the army asks questions." "What kind of justification?" "A massacre, a raid, something that makes your people look dangerous." Caleb's mind was racing, fitting pieces together. "That's why they wanted me silenced. I'm the only witness who can prove your warriors helped stop criminals, not started trouble. Without my testimony—" "Without your testimony, they can claim whatever they want," Maka finished. "They can say we attacked settlers, killed innocent people, and then they can respond with overwhelming force." "And take our land," an older warrior said bitterly, "as they have always wanted." "Not just land." Ayanna spoke up from beside Caleb. "The caves. The weapons are hidden in caves on our territory. If someone wanted access to those caves, if they wanted to use them as a base for smuggling weapons throughout the territory—" "They would need us gone," Dakota said, understanding dawning on his face. "Dead or relocated, doesn't matter which." Caleb thought about the men who'd tried to kidnap him, their confidence, their preparation, their certainty that they could get away with it. "Whoever's behind this has connections," he said. "Military connections, maybe political ones too. They're not just a gang of criminals, they're organized. then we cannot fight them with arrows alone. Maka stood his presence commanding despite the fear that lurked behind his eyes. We need proof, evidence that can be shown to the right people, people who still believe in justice. The weapons cache, Ayana said. If we can document it, show that someone was stockpiling army rifles on our land without our knowledge. It proves conspiracy, Caleb agreed. But we'd need someone to believe us. Someone with authority who isn't already bought. Captain Morrison. The name came from Crow Feather, surprisingly. The old warrior who'd challenged Caleb at the council now looked at him with something approaching respect. He treated us fairly when he took the prisoners. He listened to the white boy's testimony without prejudice. He's one man, against whoever's orchestrating this. One honest man can be worth more than 100 soldiers, Maka said. If we can reach him, if we can make him see the truth before the attack comes. Caleb stood his legs steadier now than they'd been in days. I'll go. I'm the witness. Morrison knows me. If anyone can convince him to look deeper, it's me. You can barely walk, Ayana protested. I can ride. He met her eyes, seeing the fear there, the reluctance to let him go. Ayana, this is my fight too. Those men tried to kill me. They threatened everyone I care about. I'm not sitting here waiting to see what happens next. She wanted to argue. He could see it in the set of her jaw, the flash of stubbornness in her eyes. But she'd grown up the daughter of a chief. She understood duty, even when it hurt. Then I'm coming with you. Absolutely not. Maka's voice was sharp. Father, you are my only living child. If something happened to you while I sat safely in camp, and if something happens to him while I sit safely in camp. Ayana stepped toward her father, fierce and unafraid. He is the man I choose, Father, the man I want to build a life with. I will not send him into danger alone. The lodge went still. Caleb felt heat rise to his face, a strange mix of embarrassment and something deeper, something that felt like hope. You choose him. Maka's voice was carefully neutral. You are certain. I have never been more certain of anything in my life. Father and daughter stared at each other for a long moment. Then slowly Maka nodded. Then go together. Protect each other. He turned to Caleb, and his expression held a warning as clear as spoken words. Bring her back safely, or do not come back at all. I understand. Do you? The chief stepped close enough that only Caleb could hear his next words. She is everything to me, the last piece of my heart that still lives. I am trusting you with that, Caleb Brennan. Do not make me regret it. I won't, sir. I swear it. Maka studied his face for a moment longer. Then he clasped Caleb's arm in the warrior's grip that had become familiar over the past days. Go quickly. Time is not on our side. They rode hard through the mountain passes, pushing their horses as fast as the terrain allowed. Ayana knew shortcuts that shaved hours off the journey-hidden trails and forgotten paths that her people had used for generations. By midday, they were closer to Silverton than Caleb would have believed possible. Tell me about your choice, he said during a brief rest, the words coming out before he could stop them. What you said to your father. Ayana was quiet for a moment, adjusting her horse's bridle. Among my people, when a woman reaches adulthood, she may declare her choice of partner. It is not a proposal exactly, more like a statement of intent. And you stated your intent. About me. Yes. Without asking me first. She looked up, something vulnerable flickering across her face. Would you have said no? Caleb thought about the question, about the girl who'd pressed a sacred stone into his palm when she could barely stand, about the woman who'd jumped into freezing water to save him from soldiers, about every moment since they'd met, every word and glance and touch that had built something between them he'd never expected to find. No, he said quietly. I wouldn't have said no. Relief softened her features. Then my choice was the right one. But I need to know you're sure. Ayana, I've got nothing. No family, no money, no future beyond whatever happens in the next few days. You're a chief's daughter. You could have anyone. I don't want anyone. She moved closer to him, close enough that he could see the flecks of gold in her dark eyes. I want the boy who carried me through a blizzard when he didn't have to. The man who stood between armed criminals and my father's people without a weapon. The stranger who became family. Ayanna. I have seen who you are, Caleb Brennan. Not who you pretend to be or who the world tells you to be. The real you. And I choose that man. Today and every day that follows. She kissed him, then soft and fierce and certain. It lasted only a moment, but when she pulled back, something had shifted between them. A promise made, a bond sealed. Now stop talking and ride, she said, swinging onto her horse. We have a captain to find. Silverton was chaos when they arrived. Soldiers moved through the streets in tight formations, their faces grim and purposeful. Civilians watched from doorways, fear evident in every whispered conversation. Something had happened, something that had put the whole town on edge. What's going on? Caleb asked a passing merchant. The man barely glanced at him. Silas Blackwood. He and his men attacked a homestead last night, killed a whole family, then escaped back into the mountains. Caleb's blood went cold. Silas is dead. He was in custody. He escaped 2 days ago. Killed the guards, took weapons, rallied what was left of his gang. The merchant spat. Now he's running wild and the army can't catch him. That's not possible. We saw him taken away in chains. Well, chains didn't hold him. The merchant hurried off, leaving Caleb standing in the middle of the street with his mind racing. Ayanna grabbed his arm. The men who attacked you, they said Silas escaped. I thought they were lying, a cover story. What if they weren't? What if someone let him escape on purpose? The implications hit Caleb like a physical blow. If Silas was loose, if he was attacking settlers, it created exactly the kind of chaos that would justify military action against the tribes. It didn't matter who was really responsible. The attacks would be blamed on natives, and the response would be devastating. We need to find Morrison, now. They found the captain at the military outpost on the edge of town barking orders at a group of exhausted-looking soldiers. When he saw Caleb, his expression shifted from irritation to surprise. Brennan. What are you doing here? I thought you were staying in the mountains. Silas Blackwood didn't escape on his own, Caleb said without preamble. Someone let him out. Someone who wanted him to attack settlers and give the army an excuse to move against the tribes. Morrison's eyes narrowed. That's a serious accusation. I've got proof. Or I can get it. Caleb stepped closer, lowering his voice. There's a weapons cache in the caves east of here. Army rifles. Hundreds of them. Hidden on tribal land without anyone's knowledge. How do you know this? Because I've seen it. And because the men who tried to kidnap me knew about it too. Caleb met the captain's eyes, willing him to see the truth. Someone powerful is orchestrating this, Captain. They're using Silas as a weapon, stirring up violence to justify taking tribal lands. If you don't act now, a lot of innocent people are going to die. Morrison was quiet for a long moment, his weathered face unreadable. Then he looked at Ayanna. You vouch for this boy. I vouch for him with my life, she said simply. The captain exhaled slowly. All right, Brennan, show me this cache. But if you're wrong, if this is some kind of trick, it's not a trick, I swear it. Then let's ride. They reached the cave entrance as the sun was setting. Morrison had brought 10 soldiers' men he trusted, he said. Men who wouldn't ask questions until they had answers. They dismounted in silence, hands on weapons' eyes, scanning the shadowed rocks for threats. Through here, Ayanna said, leading them into the darkness. The passage was narrow, forcing them to move single file. Caleb kept one hand on the wall to guide himself, the other gripping the spirit stone at his chest. Whatever they found in that cavern would determine everything. His future, Ayana's future, the future of her entire people. The passage opened suddenly into a vast underground chamber. Morrison ordered torches lit, and as the flames flickered to life, the cache was revealed. Crates stacked 3 high stretching back into the darkness. Dozens of them. Maybe hundreds. And every one bore the distinctive markings of United States Army property. "My God," Morrison breathed. One of his soldiers pried open the nearest crate, revealing rows of gleaming rifles packed in oil-soaked cloth. Another crate held ammunition. A third contained army uniforms still wrapped in paper. "Someone's been stealing from military supply lines." The captain set his voice tight with anger. "For months, maybe years, stockpiling weapons right under our noses. And when they had enough, they'd stage an attack," Caleb said. "Make it look like natives armed with army rifles were raiding settlements. The response would be..." He didn't need to finish. "Genocide," Ayana said quietly, "dressed up as self-defense." Morrison's jaw tightened. He turned to his soldiers. "Secure this site. Document everything. I want a full inventory before morning." He looked at Caleb. "You were right, and I owe you an apology." "Save the apologies for later. Silas is still out there, and whoever's really behind this is going to realize their plan is falling apart. Then we end it. Tonight." The captain drew his pistol. Silas and his men were spotted heading north toward the tribal camp. "If we ride hard, we can catch them before they reach my people," Ayana finished. "That's suicide." Caleb grabbed her arm. "Ayana, your father has warriors. They can defend themselves. Against Silas, maybe. But what about the men behind him? What about the soldiers who tried to take you if they're all working together?" She was right. If this conspiracy was as deep as it seemed, her father's camp was facing an attack from multiple directions. They needed help, real help, or everything they'd fought for would be lost. "Captain," Caleb said, "how many men can you spare? If I leave a skeleton crew to guard the cache?" Morrison did quick calculations. 15, maybe 20. "That's not enough." "It's what I've got." The captain's voice was hard but not unkind. "Unless you've got more allies hiding in these mountains." Caleb looked at Ayana. She looked back at him, and in her eyes he saw the same desperate hope he felt in his own heart. "The council," she said. "The other bands. If we can reach them in time." "There's no time." Morrison shook his head. "Silas's group will reach the camp by midnight. Even if you rode like hell, you couldn't gather reinforcements and get back before dawn." "Then we don't gather reinforcements." Caleb's mind was working furiously, fitting pieces together. "We use what we have. 20 soldiers, my testimony, and the truth." "The truth?" "Silas thinks he's winning. He thinks he's got powerful people protecting him, covering his tracks. But he doesn't know about this cache. He doesn't know we have proof of the conspiracy." Caleb turned to the captain. "What if we give him a chance to surrender, make him see that his protectors have abandoned him? You want to negotiate with a mass murderer? I want to stop a war. If Silas surrenders, if he tells us who he's working for, we can bring down the whole operation." Caleb's voice was steady, despite his pounding heart. "One honest conversation, Captain. That's all I'm asking for. If it fails, you still have your guns." Morrison considered it for a long moment. Then slowly, he nodded. "All right, Brennan. We'll try it your way. But the moment things go sideways..." "I know. Trust me. I know." They reached the tribal camp just before midnight. Caleb could see the fires burning in the distance, could hear the sounds of alarms spreading through the lodges. Maka's warriors had spotted Silas's approach and were preparing to defend their home. "Let me go first," Caleb said, dismounting. "Alone." "That's madness." Morrison grabbed his arm. "They'll kill you before you get within shouting distance." "Maybe, but I have to try." Ayana's hand found his squeezing hard. "I'm coming with you." "No, stay with the soldiers. If this goes wrong, your father will need to know what happened." He touched her face, memorizing every line and curve. I love you, Ayana. I should have said it before. I love you. Tears glittered in her eyes, but her voice was steady. Then don't die, you fool. Come back to me. I intend to. He walked into the darkness alone. The camp was in chaos when he arrived, women and children being hurried to safety, warriors taking positions behind barricades. Maka standing at the center, giving orders with the calm efficiency of a man who'd faced death 100 times. Caleb. The chief's surprise was evident. What are you doing here? Where is my daughter? Safe, with Captain Morrison and 20 soldiers. Caleb was breathing hard, his legs shaking from exhaustion. Listen to me. Silas Blackwood is coming. But he's not alone. He's got armed men, maybe a dozen. And they're planning to make this look like your people started the fight. I know. My scouts reported their approach an hour ago. There's more. We found the weapons cache. Hundreds of army rifles hidden in the caves. Captain Morrison has proof of the conspiracy. Caleb grabbed Maka's arm. But I need you to hold your warriors back. Don't attack first. Give me a chance to talk to Silas. Talk to him. He murdered settlers, women and children. I know. But if he surrenders, if he testifies about who's really behind this, we can end it. All of it. The attacks, the conspiracy, the threat to your people. Caleb met the chief's eyes. Please, trust me one more time. Maka's jaw worked a visible battle between instinct and reason, playing out on his weathered face. Then slowly he nodded. One chance. That's all you get. It's all I need. Caleb walked to the edge of camp where the firelight met the darkness and waited. He didn't have to wait long. Silas Blackwood emerged from the shadows like a nightmare given form. His face was gaunt, his eyes wild, and the wound from Takota's arrow had left him with a noticeable limp. Behind him, a dozen armed men fanned out, rifles raised. Well, well. Silas's voice was a rasp damaged from cold and pain. The witness himself. Didn't expect to see you again, boy. Things change. They do indeed. Silas limped closer, close enough that Caleb could see the madness burning in his eyes. You know you should have taken my offer back in that cave. Come with us. Keep your mouth shut. Live a long life. Now look at you, standing between me and my vengeance all alone. I'm not alone. Caleb kept his voice steady. Captain Morrison is half a mile behind me with 20 soldiers. Your weapons cache has been discovered. Your conspiracy is over. Something flickered in Silas's expression. Fear, maybe. Or disbelief. You're bluffing. I'm not. The army rifles, the fake soldier uniforms, the plan to stage attacks and blame the tribes, we know everything. Morrison is ready to testify that this whole thing was orchestrated. The only question is whether your name gets mentioned as a victim or a villain. Victim. Silas laughed, a harsh sound with no humor in it. Boy, I ain't nobody's victim. I made my choices. I'll stand by them. Even if those choices lead you to the gallows, because that's where this ends. You've killed too many people to walk away clean. Caleb stepped closer, lowering his voice. But maybe if you cooperate, if you tell us who put you up to this, you might get prison instead of a rope. That's not much, but it's something. Prison. Silas spat the word like a curse. You think I'm afraid of prison? I've been in cages my whole damn life. The war, the camps, the years of scrounging and fighting for scraps while rich men got richer. His voice rose. I was promised something better. Land, power, respect, and I aim to collect. From who? Who promised you all that? Silas's eyes narrowed. Why would I tell you? Because whoever they are, they've already abandoned you. The cache is compromised. The plan is blown. You think they're going to stand by you now that everything's falling apart. Caleb shook his head. You're a loose end, Silas. The moment you stop being useful, they'll cut you loose. Probably already have. For a long moment, Silas said nothing. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of smoke and pine, and something else, the metallic tang of violence waiting to happen. Then his shoulders sagged. Senator Whitfield, he said quietly. Out of Denver. He's the one who planned this. Wanted the tribal lands for railroad access, figured the easiest way to get them was to create an Indian problem that justified military action. Silas laughed bitterly. I was just the weapon, a mad dog he could point and release. And the weapons cache. His men have been stockpiling for months. The plan was to arm settlers' stage raids, make it look like the tribes were attacking with army rifles. Silas met Caleb's eyes. You were right, boy. It's over. But that doesn't mean I'm surrendering. Silas, I've done things that can't be forgiven. Hurt people who didn't deserve it. Made choices I can't take back. He raised his rifle slowly, pointing it not at Caleb but at the ground. I won't swing from a rope. I won't rot in a cell. But I'll give you this much. I'll tell Morrison everything. Names, dates, locations. Everything he needs to bring down Whitfield and everyone else involved. And then I disappear. Into the mountains. Let the winter take me. Silas's voice was tired, defeated, but somehow at peace. It's a better end than I deserve. Caleb wanted to argue, wanted to say that justice meant facing consequences, that running was the coward's way out. But looking at the broken man before him, he couldn't find the words. The soldiers behind you, he said finally. They'll follow your orders. They're scared boys who got in over their heads. They'll surrender the moment they realize the game is up. Silas turned and spoke to his men in a low voice. One by one, rifles lowered. Weapons dropped. Men who'd been ready to kill moments before fell to their knees with their hands raised. It was over. Captain Morrison and his soldiers arrived minutes later, taking the surrendered men into custody and listening as Silas detailed the conspiracy in a flat, exhausted voice. The name Whitfield came up again and again, a senator with ambitions, connections, and a willingness to spill blood for profit. I'll need you to testify, Morrison told Caleb. All of you. In Denver before a military tribunal. This is going to bring down some powerful people. I'll testify, whatever it takes. And the tribes? Maka stepped forward. His warriors ranged behind him in silent formation. We want peace. We have always wanted peace. But we will not be slaughtered for someone else's greed. You won't be. Morrison extended his hand. You have my word, Chief, for whatever it's worth. Maka studied the offered hand for a moment. Then slowly he clasped it. It is worth something, Captain. More than you know. Dawn broke over the mountains in shades of gold and rose. Caleb stood at the edge of camp, watching the light spread across the valley. Behind him, the sounds of celebration drifted from the lodge's drums and songs and laughter as the tribe rejoiced in their survival. The threat had been neutralized, the conspiracy exposed. For the first time in weeks, the future looked bright. Ayana appeared beside him, her hand finding his with the ease of long familiarity. You saved us, she said quietly. All of us. We saved each other. He turned to face her, drinking in the sight of her in the morning light. I couldn't have done any of it without you. So you admit you needed help. I admit I need you. Is that the same thing? She smiled, and it was like watching the sun rise twice. Close enough. Maka approached them, his weathered face showing more peace than Caleb had ever seen. The council has met, he said. They wish to formalize your place among us. I thought I already passed the test. You did, but there are other ceremonies, other traditions. The chief's eyes moved from Caleb to his daughter. Including those that bind two people together as one. Caleb felt heat rise to his face. Chief Maka, I know I don't have much to offer. No land, no wealth, no. You have courage. Honor, love. Maka cut him off with a raised hand. These are worth more than gold, and you have proven them all. He placed a hand on Caleb's shoulder. My daughter has chosen well. I am proud to call you son. The word hit Caleb harder than he expected. Son. He hadn't been anyone's son in 3 years. Hadn't been anyone's anything. Thank you. He managed his voice thick. I won't let you down. I know you won't. Maka smiled, and for a moment he looked less like a chief and more like a father. Now go. Celebrate with the others. Tomorrow, we begin preparing for winter, and there will be much work to do. He walked away, leaving Caleb and Ayana alone at the edge of camp. So, Ayana said, her eyes dancing, looks like you're stuck with us. Looks like. Any regrets? Caleb thought about the question, about the path that had led him here from a lonely cave in the mountains to a family he'd never expected to find, about the choices he'd made and the person he'd become. Not one, he said. Not a single one. She kissed him as the sun climbed higher, as drums echoed off the mountains, as a new day began for all of them. And in that moment, Caleb Brennan finally understood what it meant to belong. He had found his people. He had found his purpose. He had found his home. The homeless boy who'd had nothing now had everything that mattered, not land or gold or power, but love, family, and the certain knowledge that he would never be alone again. That was worth more than any treasure the world could offer. That was worth everything.